Justin A.W. Blair here. I'm a writer, I'm a painter, not much of an illustrator. I make do here and there. And I make YouTube videos. I make YouTube videos about science fiction, fantasy, genre fiction, a little bit of detective fiction here and there. That kind of thing. You know me, you've watched me, you've heard me, you listened to me. Let's get right into this evening's book, The Illearth War by Stephen R. Donaldson. The second book in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, Trilogy. Now, longtime fans of this channel, I know you're out there. There's a few of you. You know that I already covered the first book in this. Link somewhere. You can check it out if you want. Don't watch this one unless you've watched the first one. Had my issues with this. We're going to talk about them. We're going to have a little discussion. A nice, quiet discussion about the Illearth War. A deep cut in terms of fantasy in the year 2026. Who is reading Stephen R. Donaldson, The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever? In this day and age, I ask you, well, me for one, and possibly you if you're watching this, or you've watched it long, long ago. How long ago? Perhaps when it came out. When did it come out? In the year 1977, the same year that the first book came out. So if I had done my research, which I don't, because you guys know I like to just keep it non-researched. I don't like research, all right? Let's have a little conversation. Forget about the research. The first book came out in 77 too, so I'm assuming he had both written and then published the same year. If not, he did quite a bit of work that year. Fans of the channel, viewers of the channel will know my famous video about Oron the Barbarian, counterpart, shadow to Conan the Barbarian. You can check out that video. It's called What is a Barbarian? And in it, I came up with a character, a man named Dwayne from Fort Wayne, Indiana. In 1977, Dwayne lives, and he loves fantasy. He likes genre. It's 1977. Dwayne is working at a factory somewhere in Fort Wayne, okay? There's a small bookstore there, and it has a small section on speculative fiction. That's what the bookseller, I don't know what the bookseller's name would be. Comment in the video, what would Dwayne from Fort Wayne's small town bookstore be called, and who would he be talking to there? Who's he chatting with? Let's say Winifred. I don't like long commercials in the middle of a YouTube video, so I'll get to the point quick. My own novel, written by me, Justin A.W. Blair, entitled The Haunt on the Island of Esmer, is out, available on Amazon. You can buy it in ebook or paperback format. It is inspired by Malazan, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Black Company. Epic novels in that vein. Take a moment, check it out. Winifred, the bookseller in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Winifred doesn't know a great deal about fantasy, but does know about the Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Wings, the Lord of the Wings. You know, I used to pump a lot of iron, pretty strong lats. They call me the Lord of the Wings in the gym. That's what the Illearth War is. Let us go back then, travel back to Fort Wayne, and speak with Dwayne. What's Dwayne thinking? He picked up the first book in this series, you know, because he can't get enough of this fantasy stuff, man. He's a big fan of Lord of the Rings and some science fiction, this, that, and the other. But, you know, there's no one in Fort Wayne to really tell him what to read. Where is he getting this information? Not from Winifred, the bookseller, but so he picks this up, and I'm trying to think, why do I posit this fictional character, Dwayne, from Fort Wayne in 1977? Because I'm trying to get in the mindset of someone from 1977 who picks this up. It is the year 2026 right now. It's a different time. Indeed, I think we all know the times are different. And I'm trying to look at this book, both from my own perspective at this time, but also try to think about when it came out, because the whole reason I picked this trilogy up is it is considered a rather important, maybe not top level of importance in the fantasy genre, but a rather important work in what we would call, you know, still somewhat early days of fantasy. Well, I'm not really sure what Dwayne would think about this. I think that he might be a little more intrigued than I am, because fantasy as a genre and many of the tropes are maybe more fresh to him. And there are things that Dwayne, who's not a writer, he's not a scholar, he's just a fantasy enjoyer from the 1970s. There are things that may pass him by that irritate me. So let's get into a few of those things. The things that bother me about this book as a writer and as a reader, and the positive aspects of it. You know, I always try to bring a little bit of positivity to your day on this YouTube channel. Let us leave Dwayne now, back in 1977, God bless his soul, and let us talk about how the first 100 pages of this book almost made me set it down again. Why? Well, in our other video of the first book, we talked about how this is a portal fantasy in a way. What does that mean? It means that instead of simply having the secondary world, the fantasy world in which the characters live and breathe and live and die and fight and all those kinds of things, we have a story set initially on Earth, and then via some mechanism, one or more of our characters enter into the secondary world, never really forgetting about the fact that the original world, our world, is primary, right? Now that plays a big part in this trilogy. Why? Because Thomas Covenant is an unwilling hero. He doesn't want to be in this world. So, like the first book, it begins with an accident. Thomas Covenant's just back home for a couple of weeks, basically. His ex-wife calls him, something happens, he trips over some furniture, something falls, smacks his head, boom, back to the fantasy world. However, the fantasy world, 40 years have passed there, as opposed to the 2 weeks in the real world. And we get the same thing we got within the first book. I wonder if it's going to come up in the third book. We would assume that by this time Thomas Covenant maybe is prepared to deal with the epic battles and problems at hand, but no. He is, again, trying to pretend like, tell himself this isn't a real world, I don't want to be here, I'm not fit to be a hero here, and his heroic aspect is largely based on the fact that he possesses a wedding ring, which is of white gold. It's a big aspect of it. Via this ring, he should have some sort of powers to restore goodness and fight evil in this world, because white gold is an ultra rarity, perhaps never to be seen except on the finger of Thomas Covenant, or a mythological hero of the past within this world. Now, the problem again is that the first 100 pages of this is him fighting being there. And it just becomes tiresome, frankly, after a while, especially after the first book. You would assume, okay, you can kind of understand, in fact, you can understand very clearly, a person from our world gets transported to a fantasy world. A man who's sick, also, he has leprosy, by the way, Thomas Covenant. You can understand being astounded, being perplexed, not wanting to deal with the fact that you've been transported to a fantasy world. In fact, I think most people would go insane if that happened to them. Though that's not how usually things take place in a portal fantasy. Not Thomas Covenant. He basically just complains for about 100 pages. Then we get something different here in the second book, and we're going to talk about POV for a moment. Well, first, what happens is, after part one, the POV actually changes to another character, and this character also comes from the primary world, Earth, and has been transported to the fantasy world. His malady is that he is blind, but he's not blind in the fantasy world because he's been given hurt loam, which is this herbal remedy type thing, which has healing, massive healing, magical powers. His sight has been restored. He has quite good vision, and he is a military strategist because in the real world, he worked for something akin to the Rand Corporation, doing military strategy. Apparently, he was really good at it because he's blind, so he visualizes things differently because he's blind. Okay, well, we'll just go with that. No, I don't know, his name's Tony or something, it doesn't really matter. This guy, he's psyched about the fantasy world. He loves it. He wants to do great things here. He is skeptical of Thomas Covenant. In fact, actually dislikes him. So there's contrast there. There's a little bit of clashing. It doesn't actually come to much. There's a bit of the the sins of covenant from the first book are revealed to a reader of the second book via the POV of this other guy, which I guess is useful. I guess it's a strategy in a way also. You know, if we go back to Dwayne and Fort Wayne, maybe he didn't pick up the first book. Maybe he only picked up the second book. People do that sometimes. They pick up a book midway through a trilogy. Midway through a trilogy would be the second book, actually. Exactly. So anyway, now POV. So it changes to his POV. And then there's another aspect of point of view, not just that the character itself has changed. We're away from Thomas Covenant for a while. It's a bit of a cheap trick played here. I respect the game from Donaldson and how he did this, but in epic fantasy, you often will have an epic battle, maybe more than one epic battle. How do you take the reader into an overview of the battle situation while continuing to maintain a limited third-person POV? What do I mean by that? Writers know, but maybe you don't. Maybe you don't think about it. A third-person POV, we know what that means, right? Not first person, so it's not I, it's he or she or whatever. But third-person limited means that the events transpiring will always come through the senses, that which only one character can understand. Now, those who are familiar with A Song of Ice and Fire will understand this maybe a little bit better when I explain it this way. You know how there's always a character name at the beginning of each chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire? So that tells you who the point of view is going to be limited to in that chapter. Donaldson needs, though, and this is a problem in fantasy, right? How do you transmit knowledge of an epic battle, something big in scope, through the limitations of one man's POV? He has the character climb the highest mountain in the world and then look down over the battle that is the enemy army approaching. It works. It does work. It is a little bit, I guess, a little odd that the highest mountain would be there. Also, you know, it would give you viewpoint of what you need to see. It works. I just thought it was a note of interest to me, perhaps as a writer more so than a reader. Perhaps you don't really care about that as a reader. I don't know. Anyway, another issue we have here, and this is a writerly issue, is the languages of the secondary world. So a lot of it is kind of vaguely Anglo-Saxonish. And then there is some seemingly borrowing straight from Sanskrit to name the 3 disembodied evil spirits. And I think it's like straight out of Sanskrit. Now, take my word for it. There's a straight, I think one of them is like, I don't want to say it's samadhi, but not samsara, moksha, something like that. They seem like straight up Sanskrit words. Now, again, in 1977, Dwayne wasn't involved. Dwayne from Fort Wayne is a Midwestern boy. He wasn't involved in the hippie revolution out on the coasts. He's lived and grown up in Indiana all his life, so he is maybe not aware of, I think that people from the 60s that were in the counterculture would have gotten into and become aware of maybe some Buddhist terms or terms from Sanskrit via a kind of hippie understanding of Hinduism via the Beatles and the different types of bands that were into a kind of fake Eastern mysticism. Regardless, Dwayne isn't. I, however, like words, and so I am. And so when I see a straight borrowing from Hinduism, I think to myself, is this going to try to connect to something here? Is there going to be like some Buddhist themes that come out that I haven't seen yet? Maybe, and if so, I can respect that, but I'm not really sure. I wonder if Donaldson didn't just use those words because he thought this sounds kind of foreign. Maybe not. I think the terms are for bad things in either Buddhism or Hinduism. So these are bad spirits. So maybe it's not disconnected. It's just something for me as a writer. I'm thinking, if I'm going to create a secondary world, I want it to be original. I don't want it to call back necessarily to a language within my own world. A small thing for you, a big thing for me. So 100 pages of Thomas Covenant complaining, and then another 100 pages of long speeches and giant lore dumps, as we say in the fantasy writing biz. A lore dump is basically just a lot of background history given to you in a massive, page or 2 or 3 pages, oftentimes in a speech, which you're not really understanding why this person's giving the speech and giving all this background. He does them all right. He doesn't do them. They're not lazy, and they're not ill-formed. They're not bad, but they are what they are. They are lore dumps. In 1977, I think that would seem really fantastic, man. I think it'd sound fantastic. Whereas now, a fantasy reader who has read quite a lot of fantasy, we see these things maybe with a little bit more of a critical eye. And that's just too bad, isn't it? What is my complaint about the scope of the secondary world? That which is referred to on the map as the land. Well, it is this. We have an epic evil battle. Or rather, we have a world under stress by a gigantic, epic evil, which seems like it cannot be overcome. We're 40 years past the first book in the secondary world. Things have gone poorly. I'm not going to go through all the steps of it. If you want to read the book yourself, I don't want to spoil the plot for you. And it's also not necessary. The point is, the good guys are down, the bad guys are up. How does this relate to the map, and how does this make me feel a little bit like it's not as epic as it need be? On this map, and again, I may try to find an image of it and then put it up during editing, we have basically, the land seems to be surrounded by mountains. We kind of have this mountain range, which forms a kind of almost total circle. There's the northern plains that seems to break out here, and then we have the sea over here where the giants live, and bad things happen with the giants in this book. I think that what needs to happen is that if we had almost reference to in the text or some subtle changes to the map to show that there is a much broader world outside of just where the actions of this book will take place, I would feel like it's a more legitimate world, and I would feel like it has the scope for a truly terrible, evil thing to be happening in a broad, across the entire world, right? I guess the map feels a little small, and if you look at the place names also, some are rather generic, like the Central Plains, right? The Central Plains. I mean, it's odd because that is rendered completely in English, right? However, then we have other place names and words like Moor and Moss Forest, or Treacher's Gorge, or Mount Thunder. So, I mean, gorge, thunder, forest, ford, these are all English words, but then we'll have a place called like Trothgard, which sounds like it's supposed to be straight out of Norse, or there's just the Great Swamp. Now, this is not wrong in the sense that a people living next to a large swamp may not have a particularized name for it. They may simply call it, hey, the big swamp, right? And then that would be rendered in their language back into English as big swamp. But there's something about the choice, I'm going to throw out the word toponym, I don't know if that's correct, the choice in settlement names and geography that makes it feel like it is kind of a dream or a delusion of Thomas Covenant in how small it is. We'll leave that be for now, and I will withhold judgment until the third book. Maybe there are things here that I'm not seeing. Maybe there's a culmination of things in the third book, which will make some of my relatively mild criticisms dissipate. There's one last thing, the fundamental problem with this book, which is, again, perhaps resolved in the third book. You can see it coming here in the second book, where Covenant is becoming desperate in so many different ways that he may ultimately become a hero, the hero that is needed for this fantasy world. But there's a couple problems here. The first is that Thomas Covenant in the book has leprosy. Now, I believe Donaldson, either his family or he was born in India or something. His family worked, I think, maybe his father worked at a leprosy hospital in India or something like that. There's some connection there. But for a modern Western reader, even in 1977, and in maybe 2026 less so, but the point is, we in America, and I would assume Western Europe and Eastern Europe for that matter, don't really have a feeling for leprosy except as an abstraction. We don't really see a lot of people with leprosy here, right? So this malady which Covenant suffers from certainly seems severe. And I will say this about Donaldson. You can tell that he had experience with this. He writes about it really well. It's horrifying, and he does a really, really excellent job of portraying someone with leprosy. Like, it's not a simplistic thing. It really shows how the physical ailment changes the mental model of people. And he shows how people with a terrible disease like this, how they act mentally. He's very good at that. And yet I struggle because I simply don't know. See, for a reader in America or Western Europe, the Western world, right? The developed world, however you like. Leprosy, it does work in one way in that it brings us to a medieval mindset, right? Because we do think of lepers as existing in medieval times. So in a way, Covenant has this medieval disease, and the medieval, broadly speaking, is part of fantasy, right? So interestingly, we have the primary world, which is modern. We have a medievalish disease by Covenant who then heals that disease via portaling into a secondary world, which itself is actually more medieval themed, as all fantasy secondary worlds will be, than his own primary world or our own, obviously. Again, I withhold judgment on this, except for the fact that I think that he does a really excellent job with it, but it was a hard choice. Donaldson made some big choices, and I respect that. One of them being to give his protagonist leprosy and to make him a very annoying and terrible person in so many different ways, but a real character, a real person. That does deserve quite a bit of respect, and it does almost add a layer of realism to the primary world character, the protagonist there, which I find on occasion lacking within the secondary world. Those are my thoughts for the most part. They are, I will say that in the last 150 pages, once we come back out of the POV of Tony or whatever, Hile, Hile, blind guy, blind military genius. After we come out of that story, his arc is interesting. It ends well. The action, the pace of everything speeds up, reaches a great crescendo, does feel very epic, does feel fantastic, and did keep me reading. So like the last 150 pages, I was really relatively involved and into the book and not just kind of slogging through there. So I want to see how the third book deals with that. I want to see if it does the same thing where I have a feeling it's going to mirror the same in the first and second book, where Covenant is in the first primary world and then he's dragged back in and then we get the resolution. But that's all for now. Leave a comment if you would. I really would actually like to hear other people's opinions on this series. That's going to do it for now. Justin A.W. Blair. We'll see you next time.